is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
Hello and welcome to the program. The focus today on the Prime Minister's North Asian trade trip turns to China after a successful couple of days in Japan and Korea securing and signing free trade agreements there. China, though, the third leg of this trip could be a bit more difficult given recent sensitivities in that bilateral relationship. The Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, is already in China for the business talks with a delegation of some 600 Australian businessmen. I spoke to Mr Robb before he departed South Korea last night. He's rejected suggestions from Labor and some farm lobby groups that the government should have held out for more in the Japanese free trade deal.
Sad thing is that the Labor Party, during their whole term of office, failed to complete any of these free trade agreements. We've wasted 7 years. 7 years of profits and opportunity has been wasted, and now they've got the cheek to come out and try and criticise us. The fact of the matter is that our producers, our beef producers, will see an 8% cut in the first year, 2% the second year. They'll have within 2 years a 10% advantage over the United States and other major beef producers. This is an unprecedented move by the Japanese. They have gone much further than anyone expected.
The full interview with Trade Minister Andrew Robb after 9 o'clock, a bit over half an hour from now. While there have been some criticisms from farm lobby groups in Australia, those business leaders travelling with the Prime Minister have been full of praise for what has been achieved over the last couple of days. Our reporter Brooke Corty is also travelling with the PM.
A very heavy-hitting business delegation, Kieran, for the last couple of days, and a delegation that will then swell to about 600 strong when we reach China. But the very high-profile CEOs who we've spoken to privately and on camera so far are saying they're really pleased with how Tony Abbott and the Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, do appear to be advancing Australia's relationship with Asia while they're here. A lot of the CEOs who have been here, the Mike Smiths from ANZ, the mining and the resource and energy groups, and also SEEK's CEO Andrew Bassett, they have companies, or they run companies, who are already very successful in Asia. But the perspective that gives them is just how important relationships are when you operate in this region, and that is exactly where they're praising the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister for the work they've done on the free trade agreements and more broadly in terms of the diplomatic relations as well. Have a listen to the CEO of Fortescue, Nev Power, who I spoke with yesterday.
Well, it's great to be here, to be a part of an Australian delegation and promote Australia into this part of the world. We do that as individual companies all the time, but it's wonderful to come as industry groups and as Australia overall, and to support Australia and the Australian government into deepening the relationships and ties that we have with these really important trading nations.
Many others who I've spoken with privately and away from the camera say they are very excited about what they see as the genuine relationship that the Prime Minister has clearly struck with the Japanese Prime Minister and the Korean President Park. I think what we're seeing, though, is a lot of questions about will Australian businesses take up the opportunities. Certainly there's an opportunity to leverage Australian businesses into Asia, but one I spoke to, Paul Bassett from SEEK, who's been very successful in China, says he unfortunately feels a lot of Australian businesses at home are still too risk averse and the opportunity for too many will be squandered. Have a listen.
I don't want to overstate it. There's a lot of terrific businesses doing a lot of great things, and many of them are represented on this delegation. But I do think there's a bunch of factors, including the fact that the marketplace tends to be, the shareholders tend to be fairly risk averse. Regulation gets in the way of taking risks. CEOs aren't really rewarded for taking risk. They have a failure, they lose their job pretty quickly, and a range of factors that lead to a climate that isn't really conducive to doing things like going to Asia, which takes a long-term approach.
Interviews with the Fortescue and the SEEK CEO are in full on Sky News Business today, Kieran. The Prime Minister this morning heads here in Korea to the demilitarised zone, and then, as we said, on to China, where things are going to get bigger and better, according to the business delegates I've been speaking to.
Well, maybe for the business delegates, Brooke, but politically could be more tricky. We know, and you spoke of the strong welcome, really overwhelming welcome with the state reception, state dinner, informal dinner in Tokyo. That was greater than what I've seen recently for any first-term Prime Minister. So that was a very strong welcome. China, though, with the rebuke by Julie Bishop of China's air defence zone in the East China Sea, there have been a few sensitivities there. This might not be as easy to secure, this third leg of, or the third of the trifecta of free trade agreements.
Exactly, and these negotiations are going to continue right through the rest of the year. So there is a lot of difficult work ahead with the trade side of things and, as you said, diplomatically as well. In terms of the way that China will view some of these trade deals, from what I understand, so long as China sees that there's not discrimination between trade deals being struck in Asia by Australia, then they should be happy with that. But in the last few days, we have certainly seen Tony Abbott talk of a deeper strategic alliance with Japan in particular, and even to walk the balance between Japan the last few days and Korea yesterday, countries which generally have a history of mistrust with each other. Tony Abbott's line seems to be that we can be friends with everyone. You don't win new friends by losing old friends. So he's obviously going to push that as the way he walks that very delicate tightrope. Some of the key issues, though, and probably the biggest issue in striking a free trade deal with China will be around investment. Back home, this worry that we're selling off the farm. We talk about greater investment in key sectors like agriculture, but there's still that nervousness in the public that we need to address. And also, when it comes to China, it's much more tricky given the landscape and the way that they operate in China. And what I mean by that is predominantly the state-owned enterprises, which are right across the landscape, right across every sector. For state-owned enterprises to want to be investing in Australia, well, we know the Foreign Investment Review Board's stance on that. It's almost zero tolerance. So the fact that there are still so many state-owned enterprises in China, that's going to make negotiations very tricky, and certainly very tricky as he walks that diplomatic tightrope as well.
Brooke Corty with me on the program now, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor frontbencher, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister, Matt Thistlethwaite. Matt, first to you, Labor says that the deal falls short of what Australia should have achieved. Why is that?
Well, Kieran, it's very difficult to comment on the deal without having seen the details. It's like saying that a contract is a good one without having read it. It's very difficult to make an assessment without seeing the details. But there is some criticism in the wider community about the arrangements that appear to have been reached with Japan, and that criticism comes from the sugar industry, it comes from the dairying industry. The National Farmers Federation have criticised this arrangement, and even some of the Coalition's own MPs in George Christensen, who's an MP from Queensland and has a large sugar industry in his electorate, he's critical of the arrangement. So you can always get a deal. You can always reach a contract with someone if you give up everything that they want. The issue is, what has Australia given up to secure this arrangement? And it's very difficult to comment on that without seeing the details.
Kelly O'Dwyer, your thoughts on Labor's view, but also the views expressed, as Matt said there, from a number of farm lobby groups and even your Liberal colleague, George Christensen?
Well, I like Matt's opening line where he says, haven't seen it, so can't herald it, but I'm going to bag it, which is Labor's default position on all of these things. I mean, Labor did nothing over the last sort of 6.5, almost 7 years. They couldn't conclude one free trade agreement in areas where we needed to, with countries like Japan and South Korea, and yet the first thing that comes out of their mouths is that this isn't a good deal for Australia. Well, that's simply not the case. It's a great deal for Australia. It's great not only for Australian consumers, but for agricultural producers and also service providers. It's a win-win-win. So concluding the free trade agreement with South Korea, concluding the free trade agreement with Japan is something that will open up opportunities, for instance, with our beef exporters. We're going to be reducing substantially tariffs, as you just heard from Andrew Robb before. Wine producers, we're going to be also significantly reducing tariffs to a point where it's zero. So that's a huge opportunity for wine producers in Australia. You come to seafood, we're eliminating tariffs for seafood. Again, a wonderful opportunity in relation to the Japan Free Trade Agreement. So, it's been heralded by business, it's been heralded by these groups, but more importantly, it's been heralded by people on Labor's own side. The former Trade Minister Craig Emerson has actually come out and said this is a really good deal for Australia. So Matt, if you're going to take advice from anybody, maybe you should look to somebody who was previously in that position.
Well, let's ask Matt. Matt, I want to ask you, Matt. I want to ask you, Matt, about the fact that, well, you look at these negotiations, gone for 7 years. This is a notoriously protected market. Subsidies, tariffs, I should say, of up to 40%. This is the first breakthrough that we've seen Japan concede to any country on agriculture. And the point that needs to be made, I suppose, as well, is the most favoured nation status. So if another country comes in, undercuts that trade reduction, that tariff reduction, that Australia would benefit from that as well.
Look, I'm not saying that we're opposed to free trade agreements. I think, on the whole, Labor supports reducing barriers to trade. But the fact remains we haven't seen the details of this arrangement. I don't accept Kelly's argument that Labor didn't do anything when in government to secure an agreement with Japan. The fact is that these negotiations began under the Howard government. They've been going on for quite some time. They were suspended at the wish of the Japanese for a couple of years.
But if you haven't seen the detail, why does Penny Wong say we think the deal falls short of what Australia should have had? It's pretty definitive.
Well, because it appears on the face of it that the arrangement is not as good as the one that was recently reached with South Korea, particularly when it comes to reducing tariffs around Australia's beef exports.
But you bagged that too, Matt. You bagged that too.
Well, just let me finish. In government, Labor did quite a bit to secure these free trade agreements, but what Labor wouldn't do was simply agree to these agreements on the basis of a headline so that we could get a deal. We wouldn't agree for the sake of an agreement. We negotiated on what is in the best interests of Australia, and it's a fact that most of the legwork on these free trade deals are done by Australian government representatives overseas who spend years and years working on these deals to try and secure the best arrangement for Australia. And Labor simply wouldn't sign up to an arrangement for the sake of a headline and being able to say, yes, we've got an arrangement with Korea or Japan.
Kelly O'Dwyer, do you accept that Labor should get some of the credit for laying the foundation for this deal, given that those talks have been going on for 7 years?
Well, what we're hearing from Matt is more excuses from Labor. And we're also seeing what Labor typically do with announcements like this that are in Australia's national interests, which is if it's not in their political interest to support it, they bag it. They're real wreckers, Labor, unfortunately. And this is where we think that they should stand up in Australia's national interest and say that this is good. This is good for producers. It's good for opening up our markets to service providers as well.
What do you say to the lobbies like the sugar industry and others who aren't happy? What do you say to them this morning?
Well, we've said that when you conclude a free trade agreement, obviously you want to do the best possible deal that you can for Australia. Now, not everybody will be 100% happy, but it's a matter of actually cutting a deal that will mean that we get the majority impact that we can get when doing that deal. And we have done that, with beef, we have done that with wine, we have done that with seafood. We've been able to do that in a whole variety of areas. Sugar as well, by the way. I mean, there are substantial reductions in tariffs there in relation to sugar. They're actually getting the benefit of this free trade agreement.
Okay.
Now, did they want more? Well, perhaps yes. Who doesn't want more? But the point is, we have done an incredibly good deal for Australia, and it is most directly in Australia's national interest.
We've got to take a break. Kelly O'Dwyer, Matt Thistlethwaite, stay with us after the break. We'll continue our discussion this Wednesday morning.
Can't believe you've never done anything about it.
What do you mean?
After all this time.
Well, I've thought about it.
You've thought about it.
Same age, same income, same starting balance.
Mate, you've had years to think about it.
10 years ago, Greg switched to an industry super fund. Dave stayed with a retail super fund. Compare the pair.
It's never too late.
and growing babies like me and me, breast milk is best. With over 100 years of caring for babies, Nutricia has developed TerraCare Toddler Milk Drink for when I'm ready to move on. It contains patented prebiotics, omega-3 and vitamin D for digestion, brain and growth. TerraCare Plus Toddler. Feed their personalities.
Pentavite Omega-3 Plus Multi contains Omega-3 plus a multivitamin in one great-tasting gummy. Choose the multi that has more. Pentavite gummies from the experts in kids' vitamins.
Right now, at David Jones, you're invited to save throughout the store. Save 30% or more on a range of women's wear. Shop now, limited time.
Welcome to our humble website.
Sorry, I'm multitasking. Just got a second car and I was looking for insurance.
Well, nobody insures multiple cars like Progressive. One quote, one price, one policy. And it could save you hundreds.
Oh, great.
What's the story with these?
They're not mine, no story.
What about these? Rob?
My name's not Rob.
Hey, Rob.
One low price for all your cars. That's Progressive. 100% online car insurance.
Which Whopper did you want?
With the spicy Mexican and the barbecue bacon added to Hungry Jack's Flame Grill Whopper range, choosing isn't easy.
Barbecue bacon.
Barbecue bacon. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's.
For longer and shorter periods, the average Australian share portfolio with Gavin Ross & Co has outperformed the ASX All Ordinaries. I absolutely recommend Gavin Ross & Co.
On the next Rich Show, Mark Butler, he's the Shadow Minister for the Environment. He's the one who talked about lifting the percentage of greenhouse gases we have to get rid of. Now, you've got to be kidding. Don't think that can work. As well as that, Leonie Sheedy. Tragic story, but one of triumph as well. On the next Rich Show.
This is AM Agenda. Thanks so much for your company with me this morning. Labor frontbencher Matt Thistlethwaite and also Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Guys, I want to ask you both about this story by Simon Benson in The Telegraph today. It's Cough Up the Cash is the headline of The Telegraph, which our viewers can see now. And basically, Kelly O'Dwyer, the story suggests that patients who go to hospital emergency wards for minor ailments might be actually charged to try and prevent that from happening.
Well, look, Kieran, we're going to see a lot of kites flown in the media about what may be in or out of the budget. We're going to see a lot of speculation over the next couple of weeks before the budget is handed down in May. You know, we've got a very clear rule on this, which is you don't rule anything in, you don't rule anything out. We're not going to be part of, you know, that discussion. What will be announced in the budget will be announced in May. We've got a very difficult task ahead of us. We've inherited a very difficult budget position from Labor. They have landed us with more than $667 billion of debt going forward, cumulative deficits of $123 billion going forward if we do nothing. The task is great, but it is a task that we are up for.
Matt Thistlethwaite, if there is this co-payment introduced for GP visits, this is the argument, the report suggesting that there'd have to be a parallel move in terms of hospital emergency wards to prevent people that showing up with a cold or a stubbed toe to an emergency department. Your reaction to this story this morning?
Well, Kieran, I don't believe that people should be punished for getting sick. I don't support a Medicare co-payment, and over the last week or so I've had a petition going in my community opposed to this consideration, and over 2,000 people in our community in the space of 1 week have expressed their anger at the possibility of a Medicare co-payment. It affects people who get sick regularly and are on fixed income. So I met a mother yesterday with a profoundly sick child, a 4-year-old kid living in a housing commission flat in Maroubra, who's in a wheelchair and has brain damage and requires regular visits to her local GP. Now, that's the sort of person that shouldn't have to pay $6 every time they go to their GP regularly. And these are the sort of people that are affected by this.
It could well be means tested, though. That's the expectation, that would be the case, that it would only apply to people who can afford it.
Well, where do you strike the line? Where does the means test begin? We've got a system of universal health care in this country, and that is that people have the right to be treated by their doctor or at a hospital when they get sick. The other point about a triage, a payment for visiting your local hospital, the process at my local hospital is you go in, you'll be triaged by a nurse, and if it's a minor ailment, generally the nurse would say to the person, look, you should go and visit your GP if it's a cold or a stubbed toe or something like that. You know, you'll wait forever to be treated here because there are more urgent cases. So on most occasions, people don't go to the hospital for those sort of ailments, and you triage those processes out.
Kelly, any final thoughts on this before we move on?
Yeah, look, I just want to make the point that, you know, there is this sort of parallel universe in the Labor Party which seems to think that, you know, money is infinite, that you can just keep spending and that you don't actually need to look at the increased costs. I mean, we have to get a little bit real here. The amount of money that the Commonwealth is spending on hospitals has, over the last 10 years, increased by 83%. And over the next 4 years will increase by more than 50% on top of that. So if we want a sustainable, universal healthcare system, we have to make sure that it is going to be sustainable, not only for people today, but for people tomorrow. And, you know, Labor engaging in politics on this, you know, that's typical. We expect that of them. But to really properly, I think about the national interest and to think about Australians, you know, younger generations of Australians who will also want universal health care, they need to enter into a mature debate about this.
Let's move on to, I just want to finish off, if we can, on the Labor Party reform issue. Matt Thistlethwaite, Jenny McAllister, the ALP president's written in The Australian saying that the union bosses need to cede more power to Labor Party members. John Faulkner yesterday urged that party branch members, all the members, be able to take part in selecting candidates for the Senate and for the New South Wales Upper House. That's talking about the New South Wales branch, but this is about giving members more power. What is your view on that specific proposal from John Faulkner to get branch members, everyday rank and file members, to vote for Senate and Upper House candidates?
Well, look, Kieran, I think that anything that broadens the franchise of selecting candidates to stand for the Labor Party is a positive reform and should be given serious consideration. And Labor has been doing this over the last couple of years. We've seen the election of our recent leader, Bill Shorten, through a process of increasing the franchise of those that had a say in the selection of the Labor leader, opening that up to Labor Party members. So what we now can say
but the popular
is that
vote,
Labor...
Matt, actually chose Anthony Albanese, not Bill Shorten. So you ignored the popular vote.
What we can say is that Labor now has the most open, transparent and accountable system of selecting a leader in this country, and that is a good thing. Recently in New South Wales, we've adopted a system of community pre-selections, and a couple of weeks ago in Newtown and Campbelltown, over 5,000 members of the community selected the candidate that they wanted to stand to represent the Labor Party. This reform is happening in Labor at the moment.
We've got to go. Kelly O'Dwyer and Matt Thistlethwaite, thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Pleasure.
Great to be with you.
A quick break on AM Agenda. Back in just a moment. Stay with us.